Hello, good people, and welcome to another Friday Roundtable. I've got some fabulous authors here tonight, and a subject that I think is near and dear to every author's heart, which is the very first inklings of world building and how to start the process that takes us all the way from, imagination to a finished page. But before we get into this, I'm going to let our authors introduce themselves. So, Justin, take it away.
Hi, I'm JP Bernstein, also known as Justin, also known as everyone's favorite troll. I do a lot of co-authoring with Allegra and some of the other authors in the AO Collective. Yeah.
I'm Anne Miles, and I'm pretty new at this. I have one book out, and Allegra likes me, so she let me come on her podcast.
I'm David. I am from Galway in Ireland. I write dark fantasy, one in Solitude Shadow. I do urban fantasy as well. And I am just happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you all for coming on and joining me. We're still getting the hang of these Friday roundtables, but the last one was a whole ton of fun. And if you are joining us from the audience, if you have any questions for our wonderful panel at any point, feel free to add them into the chat. I'll pull them up on screen. So, if you need their, what they would sell their soul for to a fairy, now's the time to ask. I will make them answer. All right, so world building. It's the basis for all of fantasy, right? I mean, you can't really have fantasy if you don't do at least some world building. You could say fiction in general, but fantasy in particular. But it has to start somewhere. So can you tell me a little bit about what the first inkling of a new world is? Like, is it a character first? Is it an aesthetic? Is it a cool piece of research? Where does it all start for you? David, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you. Where's it start? For me, a lot of it is the climate I kind of think about first. I don't know why, because maybe it's because I grew up, like we're saying off air, I grew up in Manchester and now I live in Galway, so I'm just usually always in the rain for like most of my life. So I'm always kind of like, what is the weather like in this place where I'm going to write about? And so so for both of my series, I kind of started there. Like I kind of had that in mind, whereas in Solitude Shadow, I wanted to have like a real Mediterranean feel to it, and that kind of then brought in kind of like a lot of the culture, like the food, how they would dress, like the terrain and all that kind of stuff. And so it kind of came from there, really. And the same with the Holleran series. Like I kind of wanted it to be kind of grungy and kind of, it was set in America, but it had to be kind of grungy and a kind of like colder and a bit of rain. So I was like, well, I'll go with like Pacific Northwest or not that kind of area. And again, so that kind of came from there. So that the character became like a very kind of like he's into like grunge music and he's into this kind of stuff because like Portland and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I've never really thought about it in that way before, but it's like kind of like I always kind of think, what is the weather like? Which is a very English thing to do, I think.
I'm right there with you, though. When I was writing Where Shadows Lie, I did this mind map for the country of Lyran, and right in the middle of it was it always rains. And that was the basis for almost all the world building there. So I totally get that. What about you, Anne? What's that first burst of inspiration?
Map. I draw a map. Yeah. So I think in pictures, and I have to translate the pictures to the words. So I start with a map, and from there, I sort of make a list and flesh out what all the places are, everything that I know about it, and then after that, it's character, but pretty much map. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love a map? Do you actually end up do you actually draw the maps that end up in the books, or?
Yes. Yeah. I draw the maps. So
I'm so jealous.
Oh, thank you. I draw the map and then I put it. I'll go through several iterations of the map. So, and I always update it. So it's being updated now. When I started book 2, I updated the map, so I'm sure it'll be some weird monstrosity by the time I'm done.
And Justin, we've been writing together for a very long time, but I know you also write outside of our projects. So what is your process like for world building?
So my process tends to focus on aesthetic. What is it that I'm writing in? Like, am I writing in a am I doing urban fantasy, for example? Am I doing steampunk? Am I doing, high fantasy? That's where it always starts for me, because once I've got that down and what I want to do within that genre, I then build out on, the world around it, what the conflicts are. The history is where I tend to drive in next, and just build out from there. But at first, I need the aesthetic I'm going for.
So, I'm very much with you. Like, aesthetic is very, very near and dear to my heart when I first start. Oftentimes it will be this, like, just one image pops up, like, seedy nightclub with spaceships going off, right behind them, or for NaCl, a mountain of salt rising up from the ocean. It's often just one image. But for me, oftentimes, I just won't take those images anywhere until there's a story. So for you, do you find that the story and the characters you build drives your world building effort, or is it the other way around, that first you world build and you get this great idea for a world and then you find a story within it or characters within it?
For me, I start generally with the characters and the aesthetic, but then once I build the world, I let that drive the where I'm going from there. Because how I at least view it is that your world should be immersive enough because the characters are reacting to something that's happening there. Whether it's a villain trying to take over the kingdom, or, yo, my best buddy just got killed, all of it has to do with what's going on in the world.
Anne?
Oh, I'm really weird because I actually have a poem that is the outline for all of my books. So, and it's the first thing that I got after I got the map. So I don't know what pieces of the poem mean. So I'm figuring that out as I go. But I mean, so I write down everything that I know, and then I sort of go with that. And there's a lot of looking at stock photos. A whole lot of looking at stock photos.
Goodness, yeah. So much of that. I have like my fan cast of every single character I've ever written, every place I've ever written about. All of it has pictures. Right.
So that's what I do. I mean, I drive my editor crazy because she'll ask me, to fill out these character sheets and all these sheets, and I'm like, well, here's the picture, and that's as far as I'm getting. I'm sorry, but anyway. So yeah, it's kind of a struggle, but not so much. I mean, I get enough to write the story, and then I'm not going to go nuts with trying to make everything work because I figure it'll come to me at some point. So. I get enough for whatever story I'm working on, and then I move
on. So it's so difficult because it's kind of like it's almost like a chicken and the egg scenario, because it's kind of like you're working on both of the things at the same time in a lot of cases. But I think with me, once I kind of get the kind of I'll have the story idea first, and it would just be a story that just exists nowhere, basically, right? And then I'll kind of have that kind of think about the climate, and then build the world from there a little bit, but only like just the kind of broad strokes of it. And then I'll just work on the characters. So I'll have the story in mind already, then I'll start working on the characters, and I'll be like, well, this character is like a very religious person, so I need to build some kind of religious history, and this person had this experience, so I need to build this. So a lot of the world then kind of it services the story and the character, but then you want it to have its own life outside of that as well. So it can't just stop and end because this person exists or they've had this experience. It has to have its own thing. So yeah, it's I have like it's basically like like a private Wikipedia with all of my stuff, and it's like stuff that no one will ever see, and it's too much stuff really about all these different things, and I just kind of like I'll just fall into a rabbit hole sometimes. I'll go and check something, and I'll just be like clicking at all the links, going, "Wow, when did I write this? This is quite interesting." But yeah, so that's where it kind of comes from. And I have to stop myself at some point and go, right, there's enough to tell this story that you're doing. But then the beauty of it is then as well, like when you have like a draft down and a second draft, and you give it to people for beta reading and all that kind of stuff, and a few people might say, "Well, this is really interesting. I'd like more of this." It's like, well, actually, I have like 5,000 words on this private Wikipedia site about this, so I will bring some more of it in.
That is wonderfully useful. Yeah, so much world building ends up being off screen when you let yourself go down that rabbit hole. And sometimes I just run a tabletop RPG group through my worlds, and they get points if they can break the world building, if they can ask me questions I haven't answered. It's always a lot of fun to see how someone else will try to break your world into pieces. But you kind of mentioned something that leads into the next question I have, which is about research. It's really easy to go down those rabbit holes. But, as authors, we are touching on so many different fields. We need to know history. We need to understand geology. We need to understand, ecology and sociology. And there are whole careers for each one of these things. And yet we're trying to craft something that feels real and therefore needs to be grounded enough to pass muster. How do you deal with research?
Very disciplined, because I can just spend too much time doing it. Because I do like it. Like, I was doing I was moderating a panel a while back, and before we went on, everyone was talking about how much they love history, and it was like a lot of writers are very much into history. There's a lot of like history teachers that get into writing, or maybe writers that get into history teaching or something. And yeah, it can be one of those things where you can just sometimes it's stuff that you kind of pick up. So for Solitude Shadow, the main empire, and that is very kind of inspired by the Roman Empire, but like a darker version. Like, I mean, not like the Romans were like wonderful people or anything, but like they're the kind of like, how they would like take on a different culture and kind of bring it into their own thing and be like, you can still believe in these things and what have you. My version is like, no, we have this is the way that we do it, and this is how you've got to do it, but it's still based on that kind of warfare and everything. So a lot of that is stuff that I was interested in anyway, but you go back and you research it and you look at things. But probably like the weirdest thing that I ever researched, it wasn't even for a fantasy thing, it was for something that's like it's for a real, like, it's like a World War II thriller that's set in Santa Monica. And I was like, had to just do a scene where someone was going to get washed before they went out somewhere, and I was like, I wonder if he had a shower or a bath. And I was like, did he even have showers in 1949 LA, Santa Monica? So I ended up researching for about 3 hours, and it was inconclusive as well, right? So I was kind of like, I'm going to err on the side of like, because I was like, I'll just put the shower in there, but I thought someone will read it and be like, actually, you know what? I was alive here. There was no showers. So I was like, I'm just going to just have him just clean himself in the sink or something like that.
Those shorthands are lifesavers of just like, I'm going to have them do something so that I don't spend 12 hours researching this other thing. Yeah. One of our watchers mentioned space, and it's one of the reasons I do not touch science fiction, or at least hard science fiction with a 10-foot pole, because I don't have 3 lifetimes to understand any of that. What about you, Anne? What's your research like?
I think my research starts with those pictures that I mentioned. I know for Sorrowfish, one of the things that was really important to me was that I choose places that were real in our world, but that I could put in a fantasy world. So like my Ares, which is where the Chimera live, they're griffins, and they change form from human to griffin. And they live in a place that's, I sort of changed a little bit, but in Madagascar, there are these karsts, they're rock formations, and they're beautiful. And they're called singies. And I'm like, oh, that's my thing, because, I have the song. And so, anyway, so it just kind of all worked together. But I did that a lot. I found unusual things. The puzzle wood in Britain. I didn't know there was a puzzle wood, but yay, I found it and I started using it, So it's been a lot of wandering, but I tend to find really interesting things. And then the other thing that I do is I really look at conspiracy theories. So I am a conspiracy theory nut. I love them. And there's one that deals with the song, 440 hertz versus 432 hertz. Tuning your instrument, your A note to 432 is supposed to actually make the music calm. And if you tune it to 440, it's supposed to make you all jangly and upset and anxious. So I found that really amazing and dug into that quite a bit when I was using that with my story, So anyway, so there's a lot of wandering that I do, but it has a little bit of structure to it.
My research is nowhere near as in depth. For the most part, I generally, if I have a question that I don't honestly know the answer, it's a Google to find the answer. Get the answer, move on. Now, granted, there are exceptions to the rule. Like I'm idly working on, in the background on a modern fantasy that's going to touch on Norse mythology. I know nothing about Norse mythology. So, of course, hence reading Norse mythology now, just so I can understand it better. But that's, where the depths of my research goes for the most part, is just whenever it's just something I don't know, then I get the answer and I carry on because, well, everything else can be caught in edits.
Yeah, I have one of my great fears in writing is writing anything in the real world, because it always feels like in fantasy worlds, I can take the things that I'm already a nerd about, already super interested in, and know everything about, and I can make a whole world around them, where the things that I understand innately can really flourish. Whereas in the real world, I have to take account of everything that actually exists, and I still am not convinced that I know the difference between Big Lots and Best Buy. So I just feel like I'm going to miss something that everyone else takes for granted, and it will completely break immersion. Which kind of leads into the next part. All of us have at least done a little bit of fantasy world and fantasy set in a real world, whether it be Portal Fantasy that has both in the same book or different series. How is the world building process different, if it's different at all, for you guys between those two? Because at least to me, they're immensely different.
So for me, it really boils down to what the story I'm trying to tell. I mean, for those that are familiar with A Bond of Thread, the world building is a mountain floating in a void. That's our world. Like, really, when it comes to the world building, it gets into a lot of, whatever you're trying to tell is where I look at. I mean, Discworld is another great example where your world building is weird and awkward and doesn't fit how our world is. And that's kind of the fun with writing, is that you're not confined. You literally can build whatever you want.
Other than Norse mythology, as one of our viewers points out, which is incomprehensible.
I mean, gave birth to an 8-legged horse.
Yes.
Thank you, Loki.
Yeah. I've written a Portal Fantasy, but I think that the world building for me was pretty easy because it took place here where I live, and I know the city very intimately. I mean, I know, and I just picked on my favorite places to write about, and a lot of it was based on things that have actually happened to me personally, or to my daughter, who's an art student, and or she was, she's married now, but so it didn't feel very difficult. The difficult part was figuring out how to put all of those things together. So, and then I had to include some magical realism in there to make everything mesh well. So figuring out what to put in where and how to do that well, was a little bit of a struggle for me, but not bad. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of done, I've done both, because like the Halloran series is real world to an extent, and the Solitary Shadow is like otherworld altogether. I'm not sure which one's like easier or anything. If easier is like, because both has its tough points and it's easy. But obviously, when it's otherworld, you're just making it all up as you see fit. But it still has to have rules and work. I mean, you can't just do things and it'd be like it's got no logic to it. So you have to build that logic to make it work. But you do still have like a blank canvas. But then that does lead to that kind of thing where it's like, does it all fit together? And when you're doing kind of real stuff that's based in real world, what I did for the Halloran series was that I just basically created a city. So it's just like, this city also exists just outside of Portland, right? So it's just like, it's there. It was like Thomas the Tank Engine when they created Sodor just off the coast of England. It's like, it's there, right? It's on a map. You'll see it. It's fine. So that's what I did. But it was still kind of then, it has to, so you have your own rules and your own places, but then it's still, you're having to reference things that actually happened as well. And it brings like a little bit more research in it, because again, it has to feel real. Even more so because you're going to have people that like, live in that part of the world that are reading it and they're like, this just doesn't feel like this part of America, right? And I've never been there. So like, I've been to that part of America, and it's like, so I don't know why I do this to myself. So it's like, again, the research thing comes in where it's like research and talking to people that live there. It's like, what's it kind of like at this time of year? What kind of things do you say and all this sort of stuff, just to kind of make it feel lived in and real a little bit. So, which is fun as well, because like you've got so much wealth to kind of fall back onto, and you can get people to help. Like with the Norse mythology thing, like if you get stuck with someone, there's lots of people that will be like, I know about Norse mythology, I will help you. But like when it's all in your own head and you're creating it, there's no one else there to help you. Like
So we have a question from the audience, which is, when the culture/history you're drawing from for your world building is not yours or your ancestors, do you hesitate to use it, or do you just dive in?
I won't use it. And that's why my culture, if you call it that so far, is it's really based on medieval Europe, because that's my heritage, and I'm not going to write outside of it. So.
I am the opposite. I will absolutely dive in, but that's part of the research, and especially if it's a living culture. Part of my stage of research, especially before I even get in, once I've even finished writing the first draft, I have someone alpha read from that culture and be like, yo, how does this read to you? Is this legit? How can I adapt this to better fit the culture in question? Because I personally don't feel that writing should be, censored in a way that I'm not going to write about something that interests me.
Yeah, I'd be more like Justin. I mean, you approach anything just respectfully, and you want to make sure that you're not like playing into stereotypes, or you're being tone deaf with certain things. So you would get like sensitivity readers or whatever. But as well, like you when you're creating a world, like you want to create a world, and like you don't want to just create a world that's filled with mid-30s bald white people, if it would be if I was writing my own thing, right? So, and like my favorite fantasy series of all time is Wheel of Time, and like that was written by an American gentleman, but it's based on like so much different culture from our existing world, like from all across the globe, and that's what gives it its feel and flavor. So I think it's like, I think Justin's right. You don't really want to kind of censor yourself and limit yourself, but you also don't want to offend people unnecessarily and do it in the wrong way. So it's like, approach it in a very professional and well-researched way, and I think that's the way it could, because like the world is, you want your world to be as diverse as the real world is.
Yes, I have somewhere in the middle. I try really, really hard not to write about being part of an identity that I'm not. That could be cultural or just any. Pick your marker. But I do like to include as much diversity as I can in the fabric of the worlds that I'm writing. And same, a lot of sensitivity readers, a lot of care and research when I'm doing that. But for me, most of all is just drawing on the common threads that I can relate to. I'm Jewish. My family was like directly impacted by the Holocaust. So I do a lot of research about, persecution throughout the world, even if it's not about Judaism. It just, persecution is persecution. So I pull a lot of threads, even if they're not directly related to my ancestors. And I think as long as you have some kind of personal connection to them and respect that it's worth doing and worth researching and worth reaching out to people who have connection to it to see if you can bring it to light for people who might not know about it.
I don't think that my world is full of white people.
Yeah.
I've got a whole lot of different races and a lot of different cultures, and they're going to come out more and more as my book comes, as the story unfolds. But the thing is that I don't want to write something that isn't accurate. And if I don't know it, I don't have any business writing about it. So if I can't make it up, then I'm not writing about it.
Absolutely. The realism is important, and like not misrepresenting other people is very, very, very important.
Yeah.
Getting back to kind of the early stages of world building, there's this like almost stereotype of the writer who has been world building for 20 years. And I say this with a wink to myself, because it took me 20 years to write my first book, because most of it was world building. What advice do you have for authors to stay on track and get through their world building in an efficient way? And I don't mean under world build or over world build. I mean, how do you know you have enough to write?
That's a loaded question and is entirely, I think, dependent on the author. I mean, in some cases, like David mentioned, you've got the Wheel of Time, where it is very clear reading that Robert Jordan spent years crafting that world setting. Whereas you've got, the ability to look at the book you're writing out and just being like, no, I've got enough to start. Because, I mean, while you're writing, you will create more of the world. That is just an inevitable fact of life.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm ever going to have enough. I mean, there's no such thing as enough. It's when can I quit, So, I mean, book 2, I literally had to tell myself, okay, I'm done, and I'm not going to write anymore. This is book 2, and I'm done, and just cut myself off, because I could keep going forever, and I would, and so, yeah, I mean, you just have to decide you're not going to do that. And then, but it is according to each individual. So, I mean, I actually started world building in 1998, and I wrote the book in I started writing it in 2017, and it took me 3 years. So, yeah, I mean, I am definitely guilty of that over world building thing. So.
Yeah, it's I'll be like, I'm like a mixture of you two. It's kind of like I have to kind of cut myself off because I would just keep doing it and just keep doing it and just keep doing it, and then it'll be like it's like, I mean, the person that probably did it the most was Tolkien with the Silmarillion, because he was still working on it. He died, and then his son kept on going with it as well, and it's like and even the version of it that came out, people are like, well, this is just not the real version. The real version is somewhere else, right? So that would be me. I'd be like in my 80s, like I'm still going to write this thing, but I'm still working on the history and the world building, right? So deadlines and contracts are a great thing, because like you have to have this done, right?
Yep.
You can't keep going. But I think it's kind of tips for people. Start writing the story, like even if it's just like a bare bones basic, even if it's just a few scenes, just something. Just start writing, getting the story down, even when you're still working on the world building, because that will then inform the world building as well, and you will start to see holes in the story or in the lore, or something where you'd be like, right, I need to work on this to flesh this out a little bit. And it'll also you'll see opportunities where it's like, oh, actually, like I really am myself as a writer, I'm interested in this, I'm going to do some more work on this and bring this in. So yeah, because sometimes like it depends on how you write, if you're a complete planner or if you're like a discovery writer or something, but you sometimes don't know where the story is going to go until you start writing it, okay, or what a character's going to decide to do. And that's really the fun part of world building as well. It's when the world then starts saying, this needs to exist in this world for your story as well, right? And you won't find that out until you start writing it.
What was one, like, I'm just curious, because I know I've had those experiences, like almost every book, something pops out of the woodwork and says, no, I'm here. I've always been here. You just didn't know it yet. Yeah. What were some of those things for you? What's something in like that you never would have reached that world building conclusion if not for writing the book?
I think with Solitude Shadow, it was the magic system, which I had in mind very, very early on, and I had like an order of people that used it, but I kind of just I didn't see them in a certain way until I finished the first draft, and then I was kind of like, there's a big kind of like political thrust in it as well, with a kind of religious aspect, and the religious aspect just wasn't strong enough. And then I was like, well, what if I'd made this order a religious order, basically, and that's been kind of moving, and the order is moving away from that. So you have a lot of new people that come on that just are rejecting like this kind of dogma that they're putting down and everything, and that's what kind of causes this kind of schism. And that just didn't exist in the first two drafts actually, and it was and when I kind of realized that and then just did this work on it, it made the whole. Not only did it make the world stronger in the story, but it made a lot of the character conflicts a lot stronger as well, because then you had like characters that liked each other and would talk to each other, but would just disagree on this aspect, right? And that gives conflicts and everything like that. So that was something that if I hadn't started writing the story, and it would never have come up.
Anne or Justin, do you guys have something like that?
Yes, my spinners. So, yeah, because when I started writing, I had no idea who the spinners were, and I didn't know what they were or anything. I really didn't understand it at all. And so I had a little pirate character, and he ended up being the head of the spinners, and the spinners is kind of a thief group, but they're kind of not. They're really into history and saving all of the song, special instruments that can touch the song, and they're very into disguises. and they're just, anyway, they just showed up. So, yeah.
In my case, in the third book for the Mountain Fell series, the romance there was originally supposed to just be between two characters. And then in discussion on Allegra and myself and the other author, MD Chester, that I'm working with on Vow of Bones, we came to the realization of adding a third character into the mix and making it a triad. And it worked way too well to add that character into the mix. And the book is so much more fun to be writing now with just having added that.
Yeah, I definitely have that where I love getting right into the writing, even if I have no idea what the world building is. Because the world building, I always see it as my perfect world building, because I'm completely guilty of world building for 20 years and never writing if I'm let loose, is to world build only what the characters touch and see. So I world build in this like narrow avenue right alongside the characters, and everything beyond that is just staticky void filled with if this then that's, based on what I do have down there. And I'm writing a satire right now with Christopher Russell, and there was this moment in one of our last writing sessions where we discovered that everything in the world that wasn't normal was entirely based on the same source. And we had done all these strange, crazy magic things all over the place, and we finally had this moment of realization of they're all the same thing. And we never would have connected those if we hadn't written the story, because we were just throwing funny, satirical things out there with no threads really pulling them together. It was very, very exciting. But we do have another question from the audience. So what about multi-world / multiverse building? Which do you have? Is that more of a like building systems and not getting particularly specific, or is it like world building anything else? And I don't know if Anne or David, you have any experience with that, but I know Justin does.
I mean, see everything for the AO Collective. I mean, it basically boils down to, for at least me and probably most of the rest of the collective, is, come up with the idea for each world and then write them separately. Eventually, yes, they'll meet, but that's when worlds collide, literally.
Do either of you have any experience with multiverse or plan to write anything with multiple worlds?
Well, I have 2 worlds already.
Yes.
It's implied that there are other worlds. So far, none of them have popped up yet, but that doesn't mean they won't. And I'm sort of expecting that to happen. So, yeah.
And will the like rules and world building of the worlds you've already established apply to those, or are they going to be complete mysteries until they show up?
The rules apply to the art. So the art is very important, not just song, but all art. And so that's going to be the same throughout, but it'll manifest differently. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have to be careful here not to, for anyone who's going to read it, not to give any spoilers away for the future books in the Solitude series. Yeah, so I have to be very careful. So perhaps I will be working about multiverse stuff in the
But
near
read
future.
to find out.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously, like, being a Wheel of Time fan, I'm very like into like the metaphysical kind of aspects of fantasy as well. So like, that's I've never like kind of hid that from as being a big influence on my own stuff. Like, it's like, I've been reading it for 25 years or whatever. So yeah, so there is that kind of influence, and like I am into the kind of metaphysical, multiverse, parallel universe kind of thing. So yeah, possibly, yeah, and maybe even like, the name of the main city in Solitude Shadow is the same name as the main city in Nick Halloran's series. So draw from that what you will.
And I am suddenly fascinated and must run out to read all your books so I can theorize and send you strange emails at like 5 a.m. in the morning being like, are these things connected?
Maybe no one's actually said it to me yet. It's like it's the same thing. I got some emails from people because like in the second Halloran book, all of the titles were all names of Beatles songs, and like I got like 2 emails in the middle of the night saying they're all Beatles songs. I was like, yes, and it has something to do with what's happening in the chapter as well. Like, it took me ages to like pick which ones. And like that's one of the other things as well. I was like there in front of like the Beatles discography. I'm just like, okay, I need a title that does this, that's in this chapter, and I have to find one, and I did.
That is wonderful. I love that kind of thing.
Hands down, amazing.
So we have about 20 minutes left. And we were talking before the broadcast, and we decided to do something a little bit fun. So if you're in the audience and you have more questions about world building, please keep writing them down, and I'll be presenting them to people as we go. But we're going to do a little world building exercise. We're going to have fun, and we're going to riff off each other. So I would like us right now, in the next 10 minutes, to world build a small village with only one prompt, which is the trees are hostile. And audience members, feel free to throw things in the chat if you want us to include them. We will try our best to include everything that we can that doesn't completely derail us, and we as authors are allowed to edit those suggestions however we want, because we're authors and we can do that. All right, guys. Take it away. The trees are hostile and you're in a little village.
So I'm thinking the trees specifically become hostile the moment you harm plant life. Like, you're fine otherwise until you step on a blade of grass or you crack a twig or anything like that. And that's when the trees attack.
We have an audience suggestion that the trees weep blood.
I can get behind
Creepy.
that. And scream.
Do they scream?
I think they should scream.
It's a very noisy village, isn't it?
I mean, it's only if you're hurting them. I mean, you know.
So it would be a noisy village, though. Do we have a culture of like ear mufflers?
Probably.
I wonder if the trees can like move a little bit, like not like Ents, but like the rest of Fangorn Forest. It kind of just like appeared at Helm's Deep, and like this village keeps on like moving all the time to get away from these trees, and then the trees just like follow them. It's like they're back again.
Ooh, yeah, maybe. So maybe instead of like their houses, instead they're like wagons that they, move to try to keep avoiding this forest that's following them.
Yeah.
So, Anne, why is the forest following them?
That's what I was thinking. What would be a good reason for the forest to follow them? Maybe they are bound somehow to the trees, so there's a symbiotic relationship, and they have to be around them in order to live, but at the same time, they can't.
The village is cursed to have a wanderlust. Also, can only survive off of the fruit of these trees.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
So we have another suggestion. All nature takes back eventually. It's only through effort that we stop them from destroying all that we have built. Very wise.
Yeah, maybe this wagon village, they chop down some of the trees to build the wagons, and like that is the trees have got it in for them.
So ancient feud.
Yeah, it's an ancient feud. Yeah. And they can sense where the tree is, where this dead wood is. Like they can sense it at all times, and they need to bring it back into the fold.
So the stupid question I've got is, hang on, who's winning then this war? Because clearly if the wagons get broken, they have to go chop down trees to then repair the wagons. But whenever they go to chop down trees, the trees attack. So who's winning the war? Like, is it just a massive decimation on each side? Are the trees winning? Or are the humans winning?
Yeah, it's mutual destruction.
So, we have the village is wreathed by a ring of fire.
That'd be a good way to keep the trees away.
It would be, but you need fuel for a fire.
Come cross the ring of your burning relatives.
I think we may be getting a bit too dark here. Let's bring it back to the light a little bit. So, how do we solve this? We are writing a story and we have this very dark setting of, we are literally living in the hollowed out husks of them, but they keep attacking us and killing us. And let's make a character. And I think we want to have this really dark world, so let's do something really interesting. And we have a little girl who loves the forest.
Yeah, she like hears like in a dream she hears like a voice calling to her, and she goes into the forest, and inside there's like this wild person that just lives completely without wood. Like all the clothes and the shelter is made out of like moss and other things, and is like at nature with the trees, and or she, and they have to teach this child how to live like they do. Be the link between the stalking trees and the wood burners.
Oh, I love that. The wood burners. That's a great title for this village. And their security forces are armed with weed killer. Right. And how do they resolve it? How does this world change based on the conflict we have? Like, to me, the clear, like, if the problem is that they've been living in the hollowed out husks of the trees, then the solution should be like, living at one with nature. But that really, the trees win there. So how can the trees give shelter to the people, and how do we make this world building turn into something wholesome?
So I think it goes with a more to the like asking permission to take from the trees, and taking within reason, instead of I'm going to chop down a whole tree when I only needed like 3 branches.
We do have this other character in the woods was raised by trees instead of wolves.
That could be the name, Raised by Trees.
Oh, I love that. I like that. I like the idea that the trees are generous if you ask them.
Yes.
It makes me think of the giving tree.
Yes.
Hilariously, that's in the comments.
The old giving tree paradox. Yes, indeed.
Except, obviously, the trees aren't going to kill themselves for you.
I think the idea, though, was a sacrifice there. So maybe have a really important tree sacrifice itself, and the horrible people, see that and they have a change of heart. So.
That would be a beautiful, beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Well, there we have it. We have a little village.
They go back into the forest with all like the wagons dismantled, like it's holding them out, bringing them back to the trees.
It would be actually beautiful is like, taking those wagons and like building a forest garden out of them. So they'll slowly decompose, and, the plants that the villagers can eat can grow out of those beds, like creating a more symbiotic, healthy,
I like it. Let's do it. Let's write it. Come on.
We're writers. Every single time we have a good idea, it's like, oh yeah, totally. I could write that in my spare time between writing my other 12 projects. I have a whole
okay.
folder.
All 4 of us will now release our own version of this.
Well, if anyone in the audience has any more questions, we'd be delighted to answer them. Thank you for everyone who gave us some suggestions. This seems to have been a fun thing for everyone, so hopefully we'll do it again in future roundtables. I love doing these kind of little impromptu things. They always come up with something crazy. Once we were in a bunker with the creepiest apocalypse I've ever built or read about happening outside. It was phenomenal. I was very scared by those cows. I think there's a video of it somewhere on this channel. But, until then, can you guys give me, like, if you had one piece of advice for someone who's never world built and is right at the beginning and they say, I want to write fantasy, but I don't know how to start. What's the advice that you have for them?
First advice I've got is literally just start writing. It doesn't matter what. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's world building or something in the setting, or even just the first page of the material. Just write. Everything else will come into place, but you need to get started somewhere.
I'd say pick out the thing that your main character wants the most. Figure out what they want the most and why, and then give them someone who's going to oppose them, and figure out how they're going to oppose them. And then you've got a story.
Both like really great advice. The only thing I can kind of add to it would be write something that you're interested in, something that you love about fantasy, like, and even if it's just to get started, maybe even do a bit of fan fiction or something like that, just to get into the swing or something, just to get something written and just to get something down, and just when you're on the way, then you've got something written and you can keep going from there. But yeah, just take what you love and work on that.
Or write a story about trees.
People love the trees, so obviously we've given this is our gift to the world to write about this tree.
Yes. We're really the giving tree after all. Another question from the audience: does anyone find outlines helpful? And since we are talking about world building specifically, do you find your any outlining process helpful to the process of world building for your story?
For the beginning, absolutely. Everything can be fleshed out later, but at least having these are the countries, these are their common, traits of their people, and then just moving on with life. Yes, that absolutely helpful in that case.
Dave Gogren has a book that he recommends, and I'm sorry, I'm horrible with titles, but this woman had this brilliant idea of scrapbooking her books, and I thought that was so good. I'm going to try it. But you just get a blank book and put everything that you know about different things in the different sections of the blank book. I can't outline at all. But this is something I'm going to try, because I think I might be able to do it. So, but as far as outlining goes, I did try. I have tried, and I absolutely come to a stop. So I can't do it.
I started when I'm a fairly new writer. Like, I only really started writing properly like the start of the pandemic, really. Like, so I started without not outlining whatsoever, and just going straight into it. And I kind of did the first Nick Halloran book pretty much like that way. And then when it came to the second one, I was like, right, okay, I need to define some stuff here and do some outlines and everything like that. Solitude Shadow, it was pretty much outlined from the start. I kind of became an outliner and everything as I was doing more of it. So, but it's whatever works. Like, Stephen King is probably the most successful and popular writer there has ever been, and he doesn't outline a single thing, right? So, that's it, whatever works.
Yeah. I find outlines quite helpful for world building, because it gives me a list of at least the places that I'm going to go, and the people I'm going to meet, and the cultures I'm going to see. And that gives me focus to not go off on a tangent on a culture that I won't see for another 12 books. Because it's an endless dark pit of time that you can be world building. So I find outlines incredibly helpful for world building, and also inspiring, because if I know that I have to have this really dark scene, I need to know what these people are scared of. I need to know what the what the monsters under the bed look like. And it's always very fascinating to see where the story pushes the world building, and where the world building pushes the story. And being able to do that in the outline stage often makes the actual first draft much richer. But much like Justin was saying, I do think that for new writers especially, the more steps between you and the first word on the page, the more likely you'll never write those words. So if you can just have an aesthetic burst and that be your world building, or one idea and roll with it and just get some words on paper, you can always scrap those words and start them over again once you have a better idea of the world. But you'll never get there if you don't get something down. All right, well, we are pretty much at the end of our hour. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to all of you today and having you on. And thank you for putting up with my strange little world building ditty about trees after being attacked by them all weekend. So one couple more comments from the audience. You are doing, so to Anne, when you do your visual outlines, how are you planning on organizing them? I think you said that you haven't actually done them, but do you have a plan?
Yeah, I actually went out and bought all the supplies. I haven't actually started yet, but I have all the stuff. So this person had made like pockets, to put on pages and done all that kind of stuff. So it was really quite inspiring. But I have lots of different colors of Post-it notes and lots of little tabs, and then different colors of gel pens and all of that. And I'm just gonna color code it. So,
that sounds like fun.
Yeah,
Yep.
right? So I was like, oh, this is so awesome. Anyway, yeah. So blue is going to be, probably the world, the places, and then, green for people, and just color code it.
That is fun. I may actually have to do that. Usually I just have a color-coded wall of sticky notes for like 3 or 4 months, and then they all fall down, and then they get attached to like the soles of my feet, and I trip and fall over them, and my husband gets very upset about them. So with that lovely insight into my life and my walls, everyone, please let people know where to find you and your books so that they can support you, read all about the worlds that you've created, and hopefully be inspired to write some of their own. David, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So my website is davidgreenwriter.com. It's kind of under kind of maintenance at the moment, because basically I just need to update it. Cause it's like it's always at the bottom of my priority list, and then something else comes along, and I'm like, but anyway, there's my newsletter you can sign up for, and that's the best kind of way to keep up to date. You get like a free story and all that kind of stuff if you do so. And my series, so In Solitude Shadow, is available on Amazon and everywhere else, Barnes and Noble and what have you. And the Nick Colleran series is Book 1 is Dead Man Walking, which has just come out with a new extended version, and the sequel is called The Devil Walks in Blood, which has just come out a few weeks ago, and they're all in the same places.
Cool. You can find me at ancmiles.com. That's my online journal. And if you go to ancmiles.com/love, you can play music. And
I do this all the time. It is my favorite thing to do. I cannot express how many hours I have spent on Anne's site, just like tinkering around with music while I should have been working.
And it makes me happy that she does that. So anyway, I didn't know until today. And then sorrowfish.com is where you can play more games. There's other things to play with there. I shouldn't tell you that, Allegra. And you can learn about my world.
You can find me. My Facebook page is at JP Bernison. My Instagram is jbernison, and my website is authorallegra.com.
Actually, AO Collective Publishing.
Oh, you finally changed the domain?
Oh, actually, both work.
Oh, well, then fine, be that way. Then AOCollectivePublishing.com. So that's where you can find me there. Bond of Thread is my current only book published under my name, and you can find that on the Amazons.
And as ever, if you're familiar with this channel, I run a happening, bouncing Discord server where we write and we read and we goof off. every day, all day long, into the early hours of the morning without any regard for sleep. It's the
Sleep is
Plot
for the
Marm
weak.
Discord server. It's linked all over my YouTube channel, all over my website, aocollectivepublishing.com. And you should come write with us. There's no excuse not to. As for my books, they are all on Amazon, Where Shadows Lie, NACL Eye of the Storm, and Bond of Thread, as well as a few shorts here and there. But mostly, I'm here every Tuesday and Friday talking to more authors, and I hope to see you all again soon. So until then, it was wonderful having everyone in the audience. Thank you three so much for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we will see you next time.